that are exercising power over you that they don't have. And we're going to start with what may be the leader of the litter when it comes to paper tigers. Now, when my children were young, I had one particular child, I won't say which one, who was terrified of actually going through car washes. And I mean terrified. They would scream and yell and have crocodile tears until we exited the car wash and drove onto the street. And I will say, as much as we could, we tried to avoid having this particular child in the car when we took it through a car wash. But we were living in Minnesota at the time, and you have to wash your car frequently during the wintertime because of all the salt that gets on your car from the streets. And so it wasn't always convenient to not have this particular child in the car when we had to go through it. So when we did, we would approach the car wash. We would assure this particular child, look, everything's going to be okay, and that nothing was going to happen to them, and that we would be there the whole time with them. But it seemed as though no amount of pep talk could help the situation, because as soon as the water hit, the screaming and the crying began. And it's funny, the other day I actually took this particular child through the car wash with me, and we sort of laughed about this whole experience. But the conversation we had got me thinking about why my kid got so scared going through a car wash. I mean, for most of us as adults, it's sort of ridiculous. We know, like, this is a silly thing to be scared of. But when you put yourself in the shoes of a 2-year-old going through a car wash, it starts to make a little bit more sense as to why a child would be so scared in a car wash. For one, the car wash is completely unknown to a child. They've never been through one. They didn't understand its purpose. They didn't know everything was going to be okay on the other side. Number two, even though it only takes a couple of minutes, to a toddler, it seems like an eternity, right? Like when you're in it, you can't see the end. You don't know if you're going to be in there forever or not. And three, even though the people that they trusted the most were in the car with them, they still had to go through this scary experience. And you add up all those things together, and you have one terrified toddler. As I consider our situation these days, I feel a bit like a toddler going through a car wash. And we're terrified because we have entered the unknown. We've never been through this before, and we don't understand its purpose. It's difficult to see the end to all of this. And even though we know that our most trusted ally, God, is with us, we're certain that we're going to still have to go through this scary experience. And you add up all those things, and you have a few billion fearful people. Now, here's the thing. I don't want to trivialize what many of you are going through right now, because the reality is there's a lot to be afraid of. I mean, you may be afraid of what you're going to do or how you're going to pay your bills if this goes on too long. You may be afraid of what may happen if you contract the virus or a loved one contracts the virus. You may be afraid of how this is going to affect your kids and your family long term. You may be afraid that we'll never see normal again. And these are valid fears, and I am feeling them as well. So my goal today is simply to remind us that the fear we're experiencing is only a paper tiger. That though it seems powerful in our lives, it's actually weak and ineffectual when we know who we are in Christ. And I will hope to show us how we can combat the fear that is often so pervasive, even without a global pandemic in our lives. So, with that said, go ahead and grab a Bible, and we are going to be in Joshua chapter 1. You can also go to the YouVersion app, and you can go to the events portion of the YouVersion app, search for Genesis Church, and you'll find everything that we're going to be going through today. Now, as you find your place, I just want to set up what's been going on in Joshua chapter 1, because a lot has happened leading up to Joshua chapter 1. For 40 years, the Israelites, led by Moses, have been wandering through a desert after being rescued from Egypt. And it's been this tumultuous ride for them in their search for this land that God has promised. Their disobedience and their false worship and their defiance has led them to simply wander aimlessly through the desert for decades. But as we come to Joshua 1, God has finally led them to their new future. However, it has come with an interesting turn of events. So though Moses has led the Israelites for decades all the way to the edge of the promised land, he is not going to be the one to lead them in. Instead, this is the end of the road for Moses. At the end of Deuteronomy, we find out that Moses is able to overlook the land that God has promised, but that he will die before entering it, and that in his stead, Moses is going to appoint his apprentice, Joshua, to lead God's people into this promised land. And this is where we pick it up in Joshua chapter 1. It says, "After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. He said, 'Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land I'm giving them. I promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set foot, you will be on land I have given you, from the Negev wilderness in the south to the Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, including all the land of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you.'" Now it's important to note that no one, especially Joshua, expected things to go the way that God was leading them. I mean, Moses was their leader. He had led them from the very beginning. No one in their right mind would think that God would all of a sudden appoint a new leader right at the critical moment of fulfilling their destiny as a nation. And even though Joshua's been by Moses' side most of these years, there's a big difference between being in second chair and being at the top of the leadership chain. Not to mention, the fulfillment of taking this land will not be an easy task. And they know this. They're going to have to fight their way to gain the promise that God has given them. And Joshua is now given the task of leading them to do so. And keep in mind, the Israelites have never fought for anything. They're a group of shepherds and nomads. They are not warriors. Joshua is about to take the Israelites through the car wash called the Promised Land, and it's going to be bad. Fear is going to grip them. They're going to be terrified as they battle against the city of Jericho and the Amorites and the Canaanites. It will seem like there's no end in sight for a while, and that they may never achieve what God has promised. And even though God will be with them, this is going to be a scary experience for Joshua and the Israelites. So with that in mind, before Joshua and God's people make their move across the Jordan River and into the Promised Land, God sets them off with these words to Joshua. He says in verse 6, "Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night, so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Now, before we dig into the meaty part of this passage, I want us to pause and recognize that God is acknowledging the fear Joshua and his people are going to experience. God is no dummy. He knows what he is asking and leading the Israelites into, and it's going to be scary. They're going to be terrified at times. And this is important to understanding who God is, because God is not looking at you right now in all the fear that may be swirling around in your mind and in your heart going, how dare you be afraid? You know, suck it up. You should be stronger than that. That's not who God is. God is a loving Father who recognizes that there will be times when his children will be afraid. He knows that fear is part of our story